Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for the Facebook group called Fans of Serif Software. Now this is the beginner's guide to PhotoPlus X8 in my case, but it should pretty much work in earlier versions as well. And this is part number 11 of the beginner's guide. And in this guide I want to look at what I believe are called the studio tabs, which is basically these three sections down here, and each has various amounts of tabs. I have mentioned them briefly in the very early beginner's guides and in many of the other videos that I have made. I'm not going to look at each one individually. It's more a case of looking at how these tabs work as a group and together or separately. Now, up here along the top here, you've got a box that says Workspace Default. Now, I think the Workspace means everything, be it the tools along the top, down the side, and the Studio tabs. And there's a little downward arrow next to Default. You have Designer, Painting, and Photo Editing. Now, as far as I can tell, photo editing is exactly the same as the default settings. Designer and painting are different. As far as I can tell, it doesn't alter any of the tools or the toolbars along the top or down the left hand side, but it does alter the setup of the studio tabs. So for example, if I just we'll have a quick look at the default setting, this top one is histogram, navigator, color, and info. So if I go to designer, that is now navigator, info, color. The histogram is gone and it's been replaced by swatches. And I can't remember what these ones were, but it's gone to brush tips as a default. So if I go back to default, get rid of that. Oh, adjustments there was only 3 in this section: adjustments, brush tips, history, and on designer there were 4: brush tips, tool presets, layer effects, history. And I think they've added an extra one down in this bottom section. So if I then go to painting, again this has now only got 3 tabs. This only has 1, this only has the layers, and this has gone back to 4. So I'll go to the photo editing one, which I believe, like I said, is just like the default. And every time you go back to that one, it opens up the how to tab, but you can close that quite easily. So now that I'm back on the sort of default setting, I just like next to each of these, down the right hand side at the top of each of these individual sections, there's a little downward arrow. If you click on that and open up a menu where each menu is different and has more or less options. The first one is normally always collapse, which just means it will collapse that section, and so you can't see the tools unless you want to actually use them. If you want to use them, just click expand and that will expand out. So like I said, you can collapse all of these. I mean, you could literally collapse all of them, so you had all this free space. What does it? I'll expand them all again. Go back to the presets. Obviously, depending on the number of or what tabs you have up the top here will depend on what options are available in the menu. I'm guessing that if it's on navigator, there's very few options. So on color, you can change from the RGB color bar to a grey scale color bar, which is basically this section here. On the grey scale, it is like black and white. If we go back to the RGB color bar, you have all these various colors that you can use the picker on to select a color for your foreground, background color and that. So, like I say, depending on what option you have open in the tab, it will depend on what options you get in the drop down menu. So as you can see, there's more options in the drop down menu for brush tip than there was for adjustments. So that is basically how these drop down menus work. Now on the left hand side of each section there's these three little dots there, and there, and there, and above the sections you've got the three little dots there and there between the sections. Now, I believe Serif called these grippers, and what you can do, these ones that are between the sections, you can, and when you go over it, the cursor changes to a double-ended arrow, and you can alter the size to make one section bigger than the other. So obviously if you want to see more of the brush tools tips, you could lower the levels one right down and see more of that section. But if you had loads of levels, for example, you know, 89 levels, and you wanted to see more of them, you can bring this up by altering the grippers, and obviously you then would get this sliding bar to help you see the ones that you can't see any longer in the adjustments section. I normally have it roughly about there, so I can see all the adjustments, and you can see up to like 4, maybe 5 layers, which for the editing that I do, I don't very often do more than 4 or 5 layers. So that is the grippers in between, so you can alter the size. Now the grippers that go down the left hand side, these are so you can undock them from the right hand side of the screen. So for example, I'll change this, I'll move this top one. If you click and hold on those three little dots, you can drag that out of the right hand side, and you can have it floating anywhere you like on the screen. I'm not 100% certain how useful that is. It could possibly be quite useful for me, I suppose. When I'm making a video, I could zoom in to just the picture, for example, and have the adjustments on screen within the picture, so you can see them better. But on a day-to-day usage, I'm not 100% certain of how useful that would be. To put this back into the dock, you just double click on these three dots and it will go back and be redocked into the right hand side. Now the other thing which I have sort of discovered, which I didn't know about before, is that when I was like just checking the help files to see whether I was doing things correctly before I started this video, is that if you press the tab button on the keyboard, it hides the tools along the top, down the sides, and the toolbars down this side. So you could just keep pressing the tab button, you can go backwards and forwards. So if you wanted to really look at something really close to, you could then just keep pressing the tab button and have a better look. I mean, these toolbars are still here. Studio tabs are still here on the side, and on this side it's the how to tab. You don't have the tools toolbar. You do still have the options of adding effects via the menus along the top. But if you undock one of these, for example, and then press the tab, that undocked Studio tab section will remain visible, although the rest of them are hidden along the side. So it could be useful in some way. I'll just double click this to put this back. So that is something I didn't know about until today, and you might find that useful as well. Now, the other thing that I need to mention is that, as you saw when I changed the workspace settings, some tabs are added and some are taken away, which means that by the default settings there are some tabs not available, but you can make them available by going to Windows, Studio tabs, and you can save and load any alterations that you make from this menu. But it also does list all the ones with ticks on are ones that are available in this current workspace setting. So you could add the character tab, which adds the character tab up here along the top, so you can alter text. Go back to Windows, Studio tab, Layers Effects tab, which again adds the Layers Effects tab to this middle section. And what's another one? Paths and swatches, which I think swatch would probably go, yes, in this middle section here. So it does make the different sections probably a bit cluttered and makes the reading of what they are a little bit harder just by looking at them, because they start to get smaller as you add more tabs, but just holding the cursor over will tell you what each tab is. So you could have all the tabs available or just the ones that you use the most. It is really up to you how you do it, and if you want to go back to a default setting, just go back to default or one of the others, whichever you use, and it will set it back to how things were. So really that is the end of my little look at how this side of the screen, the Studio tabs, can work for you. I would advise you to sort of check out each of the different tabs and see what works and what doesn't work, which ones you think you're going to use most often, and if you want to, you can change it and save it so that every time PhotoPlus loads, it loads in the way that you want. Right, that's it. Thank you and goodbye.